We're getting this really killer tour of EA, Electronic Arts, and you guys have been here with the media and all day long playing this new game. What is this new game called Dead Space? First of all, who are you?
My name is Rich Briggs, and I'm one of the producers on Dead Space, so I manage the scripted events and the focus groups that we run to test the game and make sure that it plays the way it should.
Now, one thing I've learned already from being here all day is you guys have a different language than most people have. I have no idea what a scripted event is, or my viewers don't. I have one now because I saw your talk, but what is a scripted event?
A scripted event is anything that happens in the game that is outside of the player's control for the most part. So for example, they run the gambit from an enemy jumps out of a vent, and if that same thing happens every time you play the game, then that's one of our smaller scripted events. But we also have huge, grandiose scripted events like the opening sequence, where you're seeing things for the first time, and then there's a lot of dialogue, and people are talking and moving throughout a set piece. So that's an example of a very, very large scripted event. But we made a design decision very early that we always wanted to keep the player immersed in the gameplay experience. We didn't want to have a cutscene or any kind of cinematic playing to feel like, okay, now I can put the controller down and watch this.
Yeah, because a lot of games, when you first get the game, it plays a movie for you, right?
Right.
And you can't do anything, and you can tell it's really done well, it's rendered well, but you can't touch anything, you can't move it, you can't move the camera, you're not interactive at all. But your scripted events are quite interactive. They're not movies.
Correct.
You're actually in the gameplay right away, right?
And we thought that was important to really make the player feel like the story was unfolding around you. And so there are a couple exceptions to the rule, but for the most part, you're always in control. You can move Isaac throughout the scene, and you can look at the scripted event from any angle that you want to, which poses some design challenges because you got to make sure that it looks good from every angle. You're not just looking at a scripted event from one director's camera. But it also makes it a lot more immersive for the player, and it feels like the story is happening around you.
Before we get stuck in how the sausage is made at EA and how games are made, what is Dead Space? What kind of game is it? Who would be interested in it? And tell me just a little bit about what the game is.
The entire world should be interested in Dead Space as long as you're over 17. Well,
it's well spoken by like a marketing guy.
Dead Space is EA's first survival horror game. So it tells the story of Isaac Clarke, and Isaac is an ordinary guy. He is a systems engineer, and one day they get a distress call.
A little slow, a little geeky.
You know what? Maybe a little geeky. He's an everyday guy.
Like
He's definitely not a space
not a marathon
marine.
runner.
He's not a space marine. He is not a superhero by any stretch of the imagination, and that was actually important to us to make him very relatable. Not that it's cool to not play as a superhero and whatnot, but for us, Isaac Clarke being someone that was very grounded, a systems engineer, led to not just the story unfolding in a different way, but also the way that you play the game being different. So Isaac gets a distress call from the USG Ishimura. And think 500 years from now, just the Earth has exhausted all of its resources. They've got nothing left on the planet, so they send out these huge ships called planet crackers. And they just mine a planet to nothing is left, and they send all the materials back home. So they make sure they find a dead planet because it just tears it apart. But these huge planet cracker ships go out, they find a dead planet, they tear it into chunks. One of them, the Ishimura, goes dark. No more communications from it, so they send out Isaac and a small security team to figure out what went wrong. Of course, it's anything but a routine mission, otherwise the game would be over pretty quickly. So he rapidly is separated from his team, and that is where the player is dropped into a very tense experience where as Isaac, you are trying to survive, figure out what happened on the Ishimura, and then figure out how to set it right.
Now, one of the guys playing the game said it's the goriest video game they've ever played. Or it's not really gory, well, it is gory.
It is gory,
It's a horror movie. It's like you're inside a horror movie. In fact, last night we watched a couple of horror movies just to get in the mood for playing the game, right? Tell me a little bit about what jumps at you and what you're trying to shoot, you know?
Well, it's you know, we definitely wanted to have a combination of things that scare you, right? So sometimes it's just over the top bloody gore, you know, and that can come from the necromorphs, who are the enemies in the game, and they are basically humans that have been turned into these disturbing, frightening shapes. Yeah. And a key gameplay mechanic for us is dismemberment. So Isaac, you know, remember we talked about him being an ordinary guy.
I think you're going to trademark dismemberment.
We think we're going to take it over the top because for us, it represents a really cool gameplay situation that we put the player in. Isaac's an ordinary guy, so the tools that he uses are what he then takes and turns into weapons. Yeah. So you imagine, you know, a plasma cutter that you would use to shear off pieces of an asteroid, take the safety valve off, and now it can shear off an opponent's limbs. And so when you shear off someone's limbs, we thought, why not just have blood all over the walls, blood all over Isaac, blood over the enemies? So yeah, we definitely took the gore over the top, and you know, when you're stomping enemies on the ground, doing a little curb stomp maneuver, we definitely wanted it to be over the top blood. Yeah. But we also wanted to make sure that we were playing up the psychological terror and the tension. So yeah, there's going to be a lot of blood and guts hitting the wall, but there are also going to be some long stretches where you're just afraid to look around that corner. You know, you don't want to open that door, but at the same time, you know you kind of have to.
And you're using a lot. We talked to some of the audio engineers, and you're using a lot of audio to sort of put some of those cues that something as nasty is around the corner, right? What's it like doing your job? What's it like being part? Really, these groups that build these games are more like movie studios, right? They even talk the same. In fact, the art director that I think we're going to interview next even talked about, you know, going to film school and understanding cinematography and understanding human emotion with film, you know, and these are really becoming films that you live inside, right?
Right. Well, you know, I think that the player demands that, right? You know, as the consoles and the PC just continue to evolve, and we just get amazing advances in graphics and the tech and what the engines can do, you demand an experience that is closer to a movie experience, but is completely interactive. I mean, you know, people see, you know, Isaac moving on the screen, and they think, okay, you know, that's me. They're taking themselves and putting them in that situation, and that's where a lot of our decisions, like no HUD, and you know, making sure the scripted events happen, you know, in real time, come into play, because we want to make you feel like you are in the middle of a movie. Yeah. So a lot of our team does have, you know, classic film training where they say, look, this is how you tell a story, or you know, this is how you do a set dressing, or this is how you place a camera to try and evoke that very, you know, cinematographic feeling that when you're playing the game, wow, I'm controlling a movie. And that's just where the consoles and the tech are going.
For our audience on Fast Company TV, relate it to other businesses, because you're a marketing guy, right? And
I was a marketing guy, yeah, before I was a producer, yeah.
And now you're meeting with customers, you're trying to come up with new ideas. Give me a sense of the business behind the fantastic games that we get to play from you guys.
Well, you know, it's really interesting because I started on the marketing side. I've been on the Dead Space team for about 2 years now, but you know, almost a year and a half of that was spent on the marketing side. So I was there before the game actually even got greenlit within EA. And so I was sitting there talking to people and trying to convince them that EA should be building this game, that there was an opportunity to do this. And obviously there were people on the dev team as well. You know, Glenn Schofield, our executive producer, had this dream that he wanted to take science fiction and meld it with horror and make a game that, you know, had not been done in the survival horror space, let alone something that EA had ever done before. So for us, it was very much like a business pitch. You know, internally at EA, we were taking what we called.
Were you involved in that early?
I was. You know, it was taking what the team had built, which we called a vertical slice, which basically, instead of putting up a PowerPoint presentation on a screen and saying, okay, here's the game that we want to build, and you know, here are the team members that we need to do, you know, the team had already taken, you know, 6 months to build a prototype, and they put it in people's hands. It wasn't a prototype like a white box or, you know, stick figures like you know, are maybe used to seeing on a first draft of a game. It was probably 85% of what the play experience would be in final format. Granted, it was only a 10-minute slice because you can't just go ahead and build the whole game, but it was what the graphics were going to look like and what the engines were going to do and how the enemies were going to behave and how Isaac would animate. And you know, the day they put that in execs' hands, they were like, okay, green light it, go, take your team, start moving. And then, you know, luckily I was able to make the jump after that, you know, a year after that, onto the production side and see it from a completely different angle. But you know, it was very much an internal pitch, and it was very much saying, this is a market opportunity for EA. We aren't in the survival horror space. There is a huge survival horror opportunity to, you know, go in and take horror into the science fiction setting that hasn't been done in video gaming before.
Yeah.
And so we made that decision to move forward, which I think the results start to speak for themselves.
And you took a lot of influences from movies, from horror films, right? I mean, we played a couple last night to get our juices running and get it in the mood for playing this game. But tell me a little bit about that, and tell me what you do, because you do all these focus groups. Tell me a little bit about what your job is here.
Yeah, well, on the influence side, I mean, obviously Glenn and a bunch of other people on the team, myself included, big fans of both horror and science fiction. So you can point to things like the Aliens series, Event Horizon. You know, those are kind of some really core movies that we look to for a lot of the inspiration.
Yeah, Aliens had that thing crawling out of
just
it.
You know, it's just. But it was also great
I haven't seen it for 20 years,
right?
but I can still remember that.
But it was also great tension, right? Like there was only one alien, but he still did a whole lot of damage on that ship, right? I mean, so you know that kind of stuff is how we took a lot of our cues in terms of bringing horror into space. But you know, there's tons of other stuff like looking at Japanese horror, looking at other video games and what they do well, and seeing what our opportunities were. So really, you know, there's just a huge spectrum of places where we drew our inspiration from.
Yeah.
And then
we met with the artist who drew some of the tons of early art. I mean, you don't realize how much actual art goes into making a movie like that.
That is Ben Winot, and that guy either has horrible nightmares or he gives them to people because it is just disturbing, some of the stuff he's come up with. But yeah, it's
what's his name, by the way?
Ben Winot, just crazy guy. Must be. Ben.
We have some video up on Quick that I filmed with my cell phone of him showing off some of his
it's phenomenal.
Art.
It's phenomenal, yeah. And that's the kind of thing that really energizes the team, right? Like when you can see that level of design and that gruesomeness in a piece of paper and say, okay, yeah, we've got to build an enemy that looks like this. You know, that just brings everybody together.
So tell me about customer stuff.
Sure, yeah.
Because
so
you run the
I run the focus group. So in addition to the scripted events, I also you know, spearheaded a lot of the market research that we did, and you know, I was able to draw on some of my marketing experience and were able to do that. But I know that we did more focus testing than pretty much any other game has ever done coming out of the EA studio. And EA Redwood Shores. Yeah, so the EA Redwood Shores studio is now using a lot of what we did as a template for how they test their games moving forward, because we were putting the controller in people's hands probably about every week since January. So, and sometimes twice a week. I've run in excess of 50 focus groups now. And sometimes they were as small as, here's half an hour and 50,000 credits, go to the store, buy a bunch of stuff, and then tell us what you think. Did you know what you were trying to buy? Could you buy what you wanted to? What was missing? You know, simple little focus groups like that, all the way up to, we're going to bring in 8 guys over the course of a week and have them play through the entire game and tell us what they think of. Okay. And that can be anything, you know, fix this, fix that. And then we also had a process in place for just distilling all of that feedback, because a lot of it gets down to personal preference, right? You say, oh, you know, I wish this would happen, or I wish that would happen, and you kind of have to filter out what is really actionable data and what's just somebody saying, hey, I'm spitballing some ideas here. Yeah. But we would every week take all the data and bring it down and decide what we were going to act on, and then send it off to the team. And really, you know, coming from the marketing side, I've never seen a team that's been more responsive and more open to getting feedback. You know, sometimes you kind of run the focus group and you hand the people the data and they're like, oh yeah, we're not really going to do anything about this, or it's too late to act on it. But because we had that vertical slice, or worse, we don't believe it. You know, test it again. But because we had that vertical slice and we could have people playing the game, you know, months and months and months before alpha and still get actionable data because it was representative of what the final game was going to look like, we were able to make just huge strides in everything from Isaac's movement to how enemies worked, to how weapons worked, to layout of the environments.
Yeah, they talked about
system.
right at the beginning of the game, nobody was figuring out how to get to the next stage because the door was behind you.
Simple things that you as a developer take for granted. And people are like, wow, I don't see the door behind me. So, you know, you add a glow to the door and you move the door over, 6 feet to the left, and, all little things like that at the end of the day, hopefully make sure that the player isn't bogged down by these little details when they're actually going through the game. And so that's what we would do every single week. And there were some things where we would have a weekly iteration where I'd say, okay, test this boss character and get feedback and then give it to the guys, and they would program some new behaviors, and then the next week we play it again and then get them data the next week. So every week or every 2 weeks they were just changing things until we finally got it to a point where we were happy with it.
Yeah. How's working on a horror kind of game, survival horror game, how's that different from like working at Pogo here or working on you know, other kinds of games, maybe a Wii game, like Wii Tennis or something.
Yeah.
Tell me a little bit about the different kinds, because you've done different kinds of games.
I've done different type of games, and so, you know, I've marketed a wide variety of games, and I know that on most games, you know, whether it's from a licensor relationship or your rating that you're going to get, you know, you're usually constrained in some way. Yeah. You know, and on Dead Space, there are literally almost no limits. I mean, there are some things that you couldn't do in a game that we don't want to do. But you know, anything with respect to the horror, the violence, you know, the way that we told the story. This is a game
meant for adults, right?
This is a game meant for adults. It's very M-rated, and you know, EA in general has just been incredibly supportive of letting us realize our vision for just making the, you know, a really, really gory, very adult, very violent game. And we're not making that game violent for the sake of violence itself, but because that's the story that we want to tell, and the violence is integral to that. And so, working on that, it's incredibly liberating, because if you can, I mean, again, we talk about Ben's designs. If you can dream it up, you can put it in our game. I have a hard time believing that you could put one of our necromorphs in Pogo. I'm not saying that Pogo doesn't have some great character designs, but they have limits on what they can put out and what their consumers expect. And for us, our consumers just are demanding that we push ourselves as hard as possible, and that's a great feeling.
Well, at the E3 conference, which is the big game conference every year, you guys won a lot of awards and are getting the attention. Because this isn't just a game, is it? There's a comic book, and there's what other kinds of things? Because you have to think about an experience, right?
Right.
That this game lives around or surrounds itself as a storyline.
Right. We call it IP cubed, and we basically, that's intellectual property cubed, because Dead Space is a completely new IP for EA. You know, we don't have a licensor. It's something that we wholly own, and we decided that we wanted to build not just a game, but a universe from which other experiences can flow. That's not to say that you have to pick up other parts of that universe in order to understand the game, but it definitely just adds a more cohesive element. So if you look at things like our animated feature that we're working on with Stars, or the comic book that we've put out with Image, which, you know, has top industry talent like Ben Templesmith and Anthony Johnston. You know, those guys are just leaders in their industry, and we've got them helping us tell a different part of the Dead Space story.
Please confirm final.
Roger that, ground. Stand by. All tether locks confirmed. All units correct and green.
This is Glider 2. All systems look good.
Roger that, Glider 2.
Control, this is Glider 1. We have confirmed operational final. All units standing by.
All right, Mr. White. Pop the cork.
Roger that, Control. 3.
Let's crack this sucker.
2.
Oh, wow.
1. Mark. Man, I love this part. Planet crack initiated. 1200 local standard time. We are go. Repeat, we are go.
So the comic book, which is up to issue 5 right now, and will run 6 full issues, is telling the story of what happened before the distress call went out and before the Ishimura went dark, and what happened on the colony, you know, when the marker was discovered and the effects that it had on the people. Yeah. And then the animated feature with Stars, I can't get into too many details, but you know, that tells the piece that happens right before the game. So it sort of like ends right before the game starts. And then the game picks up right where the animated feature finished. We also have
where are you going to see this animated feature?
The animated feature will be released by Stars. It'll be a full-length feature released on DVD, and it'll also have some broadcast airings, and that'll be right around the time of the game shipping.
And so that's when's the game coming?
The game's coming out right in time for Halloween, so October 21st on the PS3, Xbox 360,
I can see
and
a
PC.
lot of Halloween parties, especially in Half Moon Bay.
I better get invited to them. I want to be at the Stars launch party. But we also have the, you know, what we call our consumer experience, and that's on our website. We also have, you know, side arcs from characters that are in the game that you maybe don't hear a lot about, but you can see more of their story online. So we really tried to take this rich backstory that we developed just for creating the game, because we wanted to know, you know, how big is the chunk and how much does the Ishimura weigh, and you know, how long does it take to shock jump from the, you know, from Earth out to where Aegis 7, where they had the mishap. And so all those details can be used to flesh out the rest of the universe.
Yeah. To build a game like this takes 80, 100 people, probably, I would guess, tens of millions of dollars, somewhere in that range.
You know, I don't think we ever release details on the costs, but
I know you worked at Microsoft, and Halo was in that neighborhood, right? So
it is definitely a significant. It is definitely significant both from the time and the resources spent on it, and we look at this as a AAA title. So again, it's been really great to have the support where you feel like we don't have to make the number of sacrifices that I've had to make, both on the marketing side and see other dev teams have to make with other titles, where you say, you know what, we recognize this is a big title for us, and we're going to give you the resources that you need to complete it. So as opposed to saying, okay, we have to cut this level, it's like, no, let's put some more people on it and let's polish it. As opposed to cutting something that's not working, can we get it to a point where we can keep it in the game? And that's definitely been the attitude that we've gotten here. So it's definitely been great to get that support.
So what's next for you?
For me, you know, we got to get this game out.
Well, that's 2 months, right?
Yeah,
so by Christmas time, you're gonna be doing something else.
Me, a Mai Tai in one hand and a copy of the game in the other. Hopefully, reading some great coverage from people and hoping that people are enjoying it. So yeah, a little bit of vacation after we hit final. That's next for me.
Very cool. Well, thank you very much.
Thanks, Robert.